All right, so I read something this last week. It won't surprise you, right? Okay. Look at this statistic. Nearly 3/4, 75% of pastors are concerned that the presidential election and its fallout will negatively impact their congregations. So 75% of pastors are speaking to churches, if they're speaking to churches, and they're really concerned about what the congregation is going to look like going forward. Because they're afraid that they're going to be divided. And there are going to be people who are leaving now because of political issues. 75% of pastors are concerned about this. And I'll tell you, I'm 50 years old. I've been through a lot of presidential elections. I've seen a lot of them. I can't remember seeing a nation as divided as we are right now. So we are really divided as a country. And so what pastors are saying is they're really concerned because they're seeing that same division emerge in the church. So the same thing that we see in our country is happening in our church. I'll tell you what else I've never seen. I've never seen so many yard signs ever in a political election. I've never seen so many. I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention 4 years ago, 8 years ago, but I have never seen so many yard signs as I saw this year. But you think about all the big issues that we're dealing with right now. I mean, this is a lot for a country to go through. We're dealing with political issues, obviously, but then we're also putting into it this massive ongoing conversation about race in America. And we're also dealing with COVID and all the opinions that exist about COVID. And it's like a new opinion emerges almost daily. And everyone has such strong opinions about these things on this screen. So on top of just the normal stuff that we deal with as a nation, now we have all of these enormous, bigger topics that have been placed on top of everything else. And it is resulting in division and conflict and fighting and anger. And I wasn't planning, when I started thinking about this series that I started today, I wasn't thinking about doing this message until I started noticing that what I'm seeing is that the division that you see on the news is also happening in families, and it's also happening in friendships, and it's also happening in church relationships. There are people who are no longer friends in churches because of the things on this slide. They're no longer friendly towards each other. They no longer speak to each other. They have issues with each other now that did not exist before these things came out. And that's really sad to me. And you know what else is complicating all this? We don't see each other. We don't see each other. So, for those of you who are at home, and I know a lot of you are watching this online, you don't know what happens in the room here. I never make mention, we don't turn the camera around so you see the audience, but we are running at about 25% of what we're running before COVID hit. So that means we're not sitting next to each other, we're not sharing communion together anymore, we're not serving together in the ministries together. Normally we do this big fall serving meal where we raise money for a good cause and we feed, and we have so much fun doing that, and we didn't get to do that this year. And so all the serving things that can connect us, we don't even have them. So the only thing we have left are yard signs and social media, right? That's what we got. How's that doing for us? It's just destroying unity. And what I'm concerned about is this will end. This will end. We don't know when, we don't see the end yet, but it will end. And then we'll start coming back together, and what I would be just heartbroken about is we come back together and there are all these divisions. And people are mad at them because of this or this, and we need to address that. So that's what we're going to be starting today. We're starting a brand new series today that I'm calling Holding It Together. How do we hold it together when life has other plans? And we're going to talk about this. How do we hold our relationships together? Because there are a lot of relationships falling apart. And that is really sad. That is not the picture that God has for us. So I want to ask you to grab your program, take out the notes, grab a pen. You're going to want to write some things down today. Welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. So glad you're tuned in today. The notes for this are right in the description section. And to those of you who joined us this morning on our website at PennyLChurchLife.com. We're so glad you're watching. So again, you can download those notes and fill them in, or just pay really good attention to this. But we've got a lot of fun things. By the way, for those of you who love to fill in all your notes, this is one of those days where I apologize. I'm only doing half of this. Sorry, there's no way I can get through all this. So we're going to just do this first point. The first thing, and the only thing we really talk about is this, is that we really need to change our view on the important topic of unity. That's the only thing I'm going to be talking about today. we really need to rethink this subject of unity. Because if I were to even ask you, many of you are Christians, you've been Christians for a long time, and if I were to ask you, how important is being unified in a church to you personally? Most Christians don't even think about it. We don't think about it. We just kind of take it for granted. I have to admit that one of the things that I have really appreciated in the middle of all the craziness of the last few months are the people who have kind of done a little counter movement with yard signs and tried to use some humor in the middle of all of this craziness. I think we should all be doing this going forward. So all hail Megatron global domination. So I thought that was hilarious. It's a reference to a show that I grew up watching, so it's just funny. I like this one. These signs are dumb. And I wish I had the right picture, because it says elect something, and obviously it's but, and you can see what have you got to lose, as I'm assuming is the next part of it. It just makes me laugh. Like, people need to laugh more. How about this one? Trump likes Hunt's ketchup. Trump hates pierogies. Trump moved my parking chair. I don't even know what that one means. It makes me laugh, but just funny. How about this one? Giant meteor for 2020 just ended already. Isn't that the one where, like, if this had to go on longer, we're like, I'm voting for the meteor. Just take us all out. So, okay, I appreciate that. That's good. So I'm grateful for people who are trying to make us laugh in the middle of it. One of the things that doesn't make sense, if you know your Christianity, or maybe you're just beginning, Jesus had this plan that, if you think about it on the surface, sounds absolutely ridiculous. God, I'm telling you right now, God can't stand the condition of the world that we live in right now. There are so many things about the world that he hates. He just can't stand. And so God doesn't sit at a distance uninvolved. Instead, 2,000 years ago, he sent his only son into the world on a mission. And the mission was to bring change, to bring God's love and his change and his truth into this world. And so the way that Jesus did it, again, he came, he lived his life, he chose 12 people that were his disciples, and he poured his life into them with the intent that when he was done, he wasn't staying. He was going to lay down his life for all of us, and then rise again and go back into heaven, and he's coming again. And his plan was, okay, now you 12 people, you go change the whole world. How would you like to be one of the 12 people, and God the Son says that to you? You're my choice, go change the world. Bring my love and truth into the whole world. And it's like, how many of you would have signed up for that? I'll be one of the 12. Like, oh my goodness, this seems crazy. But he's like, don't worry, you won't do it alone. But this is my plan. You will bring my love and light and truth into this whole world and change the world. And you're going to start something called the church. They didn't even know what that meant, but they were the people that he was going to use to start it. Now, he knew that the only way that was going to work is if those 12 were really one, right? It's the only way it was going to work. And so right before his time on the cross, he prayed this prayer in front of his disciples. He said, Father, I want you to protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me. And look at this, so that they may be one as we are one. Now, interesting, it dawned on me this last week. I never thought about this before. The only other time I'm really aware in the Bible where it talks about two becoming one is in the context of a husband and wife relationship, right? If some of you are familiar with those verses, it's the two shall become one, and the oneness is not sexual, it's a unity that happens in that marriage relationship, right? And he says, but here is what I want for you as my followers. I want you to become one. I want you to be so united that it's like one. Then he doesn't stop. He goes on and keeps praying, and he says, so that all of them, and he's saying, Father, make it so that all of them may be one, just as you are in me and I am in you. And then he doesn't stop there, and he goes on in the very next verse and keeps praying and says, I've given them the glory that you gave me so that they may be one as we are one. Do you hear the repetition? Again and again, 3 times in one prayer, Jesus says, please make them one, please make them one, please make them one. Let them really be united and strong. Now, what that tells me is that Jesus knows what it's like to have unanswered prayer. Because the church in America is not one. The church is constantly bickering and fighting and splitting and dividing. This is a sad part of my job. I have a folder that I keep on my computer where I document fights and church splits and what they split over. I don't even look for content anymore because I have so many stories. The church is not one in America, the church is petty, and the church is divided. And so here are actual examples of there's a church in Louisiana where you can go today and look at it. When you pull up on the outside, half of the roof is red and half of the roof is green. Because when it came time for the construction project to be done on the church, they got in a fight. And half the members wanted it red, and half the members wanted it green, and they were going to split the church. And the only way they came to hold on to that unity was to change. To half of the roof would be red and half was green. I wish I was making that up, but that's not even the worst. There is a story I have in my folder of a church that got in a fight over the length of the worship pastor's beard. How long can it be before it's sin? And they got in a fight about it. And there's another church that got in a fight and it got so bad they actually decided to take a vote among members only about whether or not to keep a clock in the entryway of the church. And they had to have a vote. But the craziest of all that I've read recently is a church was having a potluck, they were doing a meal, and they got in a fight over what type of green beans the church should serve. What brand of green beans they should serve. The simple solution to that is none. Neither, right? You can leave the green beans at home, leave the lima beans at home, and leave the peas at home. Problem solved, right? Just bring chocolate. That's all we need, and the world will be fine. But they actually fought about this. I wish I was making this up, but I never have a problem finding new stories. In fact, I don't even look anymore. Because this is the church in America. We fight about crazy stuff that doesn't matter at all, and we fight and divide and fight and divide. Jesus knows what it's like to have unanswered prayer because he prayed for unity, and it's not happening. So here's the real question. How do we prevent that from happening? How do we keep from being one of those stories? How do we prevent it so that we don't lose what God is praying for us? Well, on your notes, first thing is this. We have to make the decision that unity is important to me. You have to decide this. You have to decide whether it's important to you or not. And no one can make that decision other than you. But it was so important to Jesus that he prayed for it 3 times in one prayer. Make them one, make them one, make them one. Let them really be united. Now, why is it so important? Take a look at this quote. One of my favorite, there's a leadership expert. I don't even know if he's a Christian or not, but I saw this quote years ago and I loved it. In all but the rarest cases, one is too small a number to produce greatness. In all but the rarest cases, one is too small to produce. Do you know what he's saying? There are great needs in this world, aren't there? Great needs. Humongous needs. And one is too small to have a great impact in this world in all but the rarest cases, right? But if you have many, and they are all aligned and united, then they can have great impact. Let me show you what I mean. Now, in your program today is an announcement about something that we discovered a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, a church member was on Facebook and noticed that there's this wonderful feeding program in Dodgeville at the Methodist Church. And they feed hungry people every Wednesday night for free. If you're hungry, you don't have to prove anything. You just come and they'll feed you for free. And they were feeding over 100 and some, I don't remember the specific numbers anymore, before COVID happened, and then unemployment, and then the other issues happened, and now we've been told they're feeding over 180 every single Wednesday. And here's what they put on their social media page a few weeks ago. Last night, our families' hearts were empty. We had to turn away families for the first time because we had nothing left to give them, no food. There are so many hungry people in our community, and it hurts so much to turn them away. And so when we heard about this, we're like, we just found our serving focus, and it's not for the month, it's for ongoing until this is over and people aren't suffering like this. There are a lot of needs in the community, but obviously, if you can't eat, that's a big problem, and probably the biggest, especially since we've served this, we know a lot of the people that come to that are children. And so we're not okay with that. We cannot be okay with being in a community where there are hungry kids and they go to a place to get some free food and there's no food for them. So we heard about this. We put it in the program 2 Sundays ago. We've made 2 announcements to a much smaller church. And in 2 Sundays of announcing it, over $2,000 has been given so far. Yeah, isn't that amazing? That's fantastic. Over $2,000 to feed hungry families in our community in 2 announcements. And now there are people who are watching, and you didn't even know this, and now you're going to know. And you go to our website at penulchurchlife.com. There's a giving tab, and one of the drop-downs is benevolence. It's giving to this. We will just give anything given in that, we will give to feeding friends. So you can be a part of it, even when watching from home, in the safety of your home. Because, and here's the reality, okay? I could not have given $2,000 in the last 2 weeks. I am too small a number to have a great impact. But we have a great impact. Does that make sense? Do you see it? No, do you get why Jesus said make them one? Because when we're one and we are aligned with God's purposes, does he care about feeding hungry? Oh my goodness, have you read what he said? I can't do it, but we can. We can do it. That's why unity is so important. So you have to understand what's at stake when unity is the topic. And you've got to make up your mind that no matter what, we're going to be united. I can't make that decision for you. You alone can make that decision, and you have to say, unity matters to me. So we're going to hold on to unity. Now, that's one thing to say it, but then we interact with each other. And we read each other's social media posts. It's like, maybe I don't really value unity. So how do you hold on to unity when we're so different? So that's what the rest of this is about. So now we're going to go to Romans, and we're going to show you what the Bible says. So the Bible says, here's how to hold on to unity when we're so different. And we value different things. We have different opinions. First, it says, you got to learn to distinguish between what is essential and what's not essential. On essentials, we have unity. On non-essentials, we extend grace. When it's essential, we are unified on the essentials. But everything else that's in the non-essential list, we extend grace on. So let me show you what this is. The verses I'm going to read for the rest of this message are all from Romans chapter 14, I think almost all of them. Because in this chapter, the Roman church was getting divided. There was fights in the church. One of the fights was incredible. This was a fight that they had. At that time, when this letter was written a couple thousand years ago, you could go into a public market to buy food, and there would be meat that was put out for the day that had been offered in sacrifice to a false god. So if you were a worshiper of Apollo or Athena or some of these other gods in Rome at the time, you could, if as part of your worship, you could take your animal to the priest for Apollo, and they would sacrifice the animal and put it in front of the statue, and then you'd go away having accomplished your goal. The problem is statues don't eat a lot of meat. Statues just aren't hungry. So the priest would take the meat after it's been offered, take it to market and sell it. And make some money. Eat what he wanted, sell the rest. So Christians would be going through the market looking for food, and they're like, hey, why is this meat so much discounted? Well, it was meat that was offered to Apollo. And they're like, discounted meat? Absolutely, sounds good to me. I want some hamburgers tonight. I'm taking that. And so some would buy the meat and eat it because they just like beef. And some would see them eating meat sacrificed to animals and like, sacrifice to these false gods. And like, you can't eat that. That is a sin. If you eat meat that's been sacrificed to a false god, you are sinning. And so they got in this huge fight. And the church was splitting over whether to eat the meat or not, which of course the easy answer is yes, eat the meat. My goodness, it's meat, it's awesome, meat's great. Leave the green beans at home, eat the meat. See how this works? This is simple. So they were getting a huge fight over it. Huge fight. And the church was actually dividing over this. And so here are the guidelines for this issue, and there were other issues, and he addresses it. So he said, you have to distinguish between what's essential and not essential. So he said this, I want you to accept other believers who are weak in the faith, and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. There are 2 commands in that verse. I wanted to highlight them so you could see it. First, accept other believers. If you've got your pen, underline that phrase, accept other believers. And look at the second command in the verse. Don't argue with them. Underline those words. Accept them and don't argue with them. Accept them and don't argue with them. So the meat eaters had to accept and not argue with the non-meat eaters. And the non-meat eaters had to accept the meat eaters and not argue with them, even though they considered it a sin. It's a sin if you do this. It's like, stop it. Don't argue and accept them. Don't argue and accept them. Because it's not essential. You know how many people are going to go to heaven or hell based on whether or not they ate that meat? Zero. Zero. So if it's not essential, we don't fight about it. We don't argue, and we don't split up over something that's not essential. Well, non-essentials, we extend grace. We're just not going to get into fights about non-essentials. So the difference is, again, does changing this compromise Christianity so much that eternity is at stake? For instance, it's a very short list of things that are essential in the New Testament. The deity of Jesus is one of them. In other words, who's Jesus to you? If Jesus, some people believe that Jesus was just a really nice guy. Okay, so I would not attend a church where they thought that Jesus was just a really nice guy. I wouldn't go there. Because lots and lots of nice guys die, and they can't change anything about my life. Do you know, I'm a huge World War II fan. Do you know how many stories I've read about in World War II, a grenade would come in to a foxhole, and the soldier would throw his body over it to protect his brothers because he loved them so much, and he would die for them. And we revere that, and we respect that, and we admire that, but that death does nothing for me, personally. But if God came and gave his life on a cross for all of my unloving words and thoughts and behaviors, now that works. That can change me. So it's essential. If you go to our doctrinal page on our website, you can see the short list of things that were essential. So on essentials, we have unity. Yep, we are combined on these. We're together on these, but everything else, non-essentials, we're not fighting about them. And again, it's not that they're unimportant. It's that nobody's eternal future is affected. Therefore, here's a short list of some of the things that churches fight and split over all the time that we would never, ever, ever fight over, and we would never split over. Whether or not giving out candy on October 31st is evil. We'd never fight about it. Plenty of Christians want to fight about that. We will never spend 1 minute of our lives fighting about that. So it's just not essential. Nobody's going to heaven or hell based on whether or not the entrance exam to heaven isn't, did you give out candy on October 31st? Oh, you did. I'm sorry, I can't take you. Get it? It's not essential. It's not that they're unimportant. These things, having a beer, oh my goodness, do you know how many churches I would get in trouble just for having those few words on a slide in a church in? There would be plenty of churches. We're just having the words up there. But I'm sorry, it's not in the New Testament. He actually made alcohol. Sorry. I can't change it just for people's opinions in America. It's not a sin to have a beer. Drunkenness is what he says, don't cross that line, because that's where you're giving control over your life to something other than God, and he doesn't want that for you. But having a beer, there is nothing wrong with it. And we wouldn't argue about it, and we wouldn't fight about it. Length of a pastor's beard. Version of the Bible to use. How many times the pastor mentions chocolate in a sermon? We would never fight about that. We would just be totally fine with that, right? So the two things, we accept each other and we don't argue about things that are not essential. So I'm adding some things to it. Here are new things. New items that we're putting on the list. So these things are things that are no longer, we don't fight about them. We don't fight about COVID opinions. And you know what he'd actually say is don't argue about them. He'd say don't argue about them. It's like, what are we going to talk about then? It's like, for goodness sakes, that's all they talk about. You just silenced so many people in America. Yeah, mask opinions. Oh my goodness. Political views, who you voted for. Why? Because here's the thing, none of those are essential. I'm not saying they're unimportant, but how many people think, honestly, that when you get to heaven, God's going to say, who'd you vote for in 2020? Did you vote? Oh my goodness, you voted for them? Straight to hell with you, right? It's not happening. It's not essential. Not unimportant, but nobody goes to heaven or hell based on those decisions. You get the difference? We have to be united about the things that are essential, and everything else we're extending grace. We don't argue. We're not arguing about them. You can have your opinion and be loved and accepted here. That's such a key word. You can have a difference of opinion from me on every one of the items on that list, and you are still acceptable to me. You are accepted. Not tolerated, accepted. That's the command. We can have respectful discussions all we want, but if it starts to cross the line, we're done. It's not essential. Because we accept and we don't argue. So that's the first thing. The second thing he says is shocking to most people when they read it for the first time. The second thing the Bible would say about everything on that non-essential list, and everything I could have put on there, is keep your opinion to yourself. Keep your opinion to yourself. And this is stunning the first time people read this. So in Romans 14, again, you have people that are strongly on one side and strongly on the other side, and they're fighting and fighting and fighting, and he's like, stop arguing. And then at the end of the chapter, after explaining all this, he says this to them. Look at this. He said, so whatever you believe about these things, keep between yourself and God. Wait a second. It doesn't say, whatever you believe about these things, post all over social media. It doesn't say that, does it? Isn't it stunning? What he's actually saying is, will you just shut your mouth? Keep your mouth closed. Keep your fingers off the keyboard. You don't need to share your opinions on everything. Keep between yourself and God. That's crazy. I mean, I remember the first time I shared this in a service, one person who really likes to post, well, it happened more than one person, came up and like, I didn't know that was in there. It's like, it's just what he says. I'm just quoting. I didn't write this verse. But if you have an opinion about non-essentials, the first thing he says is, well, keep it between yourself and between yourself and God. And that's really hard. But I'll tell you what, if you decide that you're going to share your opinion, do you know the command that's supposed to associate the words that you post or the words that you say? Look at that. Always be humble and gentle. Okay, so you're going to share your opinion, and you're welcome to it. It's America. You have the freedom of speech. You can post whatever you want. But if you're going to post, then will you please make sure you obey that verse, that there's humility in what you say? Because the reality is you could be wrong. Do you know how many studies show that we're wrong 40% of the time? So we're wrong all the time. So if there isn't humility reflected in your words, then you're not ready to say it. I may be wrong about this, but I saw this and I'm really concerned about it. That's humility and gentleness, not what you see so much, this antagonistic, that's not okay if you follow Jesus. It's okay to have differences of opinion. We accept each other, we don't argue about them, we keep them to ourselves. When they do come out, they come out with humility and gentleness. And then one more that is so important right now. Stop labeling those who are different. They have a difference of opinion than you do. No labels are allowed. God does not allow you to put labels on Christians who have a different opinion than you do. He doesn't give you that right. You don't get to label people. You're not God. If you were God, then you could label anyone you wanted to label, but you're not. You're just a people, like all of us. That's all you are. I can't tell you, this is one of the most disappointing parts of it. First, for our nation. You know how many times I've heard in the last few months labels like these? Do you know how many times I've heard these labels thrown around? In terms of who you voted for, or what your political views are, or what your COVID views are, or whether you wear a mask or don't wear a mask, whether you think it's a conspiracy or not a conspiracy. I can't tell you how many times these words, and I only put the nice words up because there are a lot of worse words that people are using to label people who don't believe what they believe. But I've also seen it in Christianity where it enters into church relationships, where even in the church relationships, if you don't believe what I believe, you're stupid. And it's not okay. You don't get to label somebody else because they have a difference of opinion than you do. And if you want to see how blunt and direct God is, look at this verse. Those who feel free to eat anything, again, you eat the meat, fine. You must not look down on those who don't eat the meat. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. That key sentence is the last one. So again, in that church, this is what it's like. We're in the meat-eating group over here. We eat anything. Well, you put it on that market, we're buying it. And these are like, well, we only eat the meat that hasn't been sacrificed. So we're in this group. So it's like, you don't get to label the other group. You don't get to think you're better than them because you don't eat the meat. And you don't think that you're better than them because you do. You're not better than them. No labels. And look at how specific he is. Do not look down on the other group. So let me be direct. Democrats, don't you dare look down on Republicans. And Republicans, don't you dare look down on Democrats. Do you get that? how clear this is? You don't get to. You're not smarter because of who you voted for. I know you think you are, but you're not. And don't you dare look down on them. And those of you who think that COVID is nothing, don't you dare look down on people who are scared. And those of you who are scared, don't you dare look down on people who think it's nothing. Don't you dare. You don't get that right. You are not better than because of your opinion. We accept and we don't argue. We treat each other respectfully. I wanted to make this really, really personal for what we've gone through as a nation. So, okay, those of you who voted for Biden, you must not look down on those who didn't. And those of you who voted for Trump, you must not condemn those who didn't, for God has accepted them. I wrote no verses in Scripture except that one. So, right? But that last part is really important. That last part is really important. The last 4 words, God has accepted them. And isn't that kind of the most important thing? I mean, the reality is all of us deal with tremendous rejection in this world. We have all our life, we always will. And here's the cool thing. Anyone who comes to God, Democrat, Republic, COVID, yes, COVID, no. Anyone, they are accepted by God unconditionally because he just loves them. And God has already accepted them. It's so interesting. He goes on to say, who are you to condemn someone that God has accepted? Who are you? Who do you think you are? That's what he's saying. How dare you put yourself above God? You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that. Those of you who only wear masks must not look down on those who don't. And those of you who think this was a political conspiracy must not condemn those who do. You know why? Because God has accepted them. Do you get how clear this is in the Bible? He is just so clear about it. Because we are powerful. I am not. We are powerful. I am not. And if we let ourselves be torn apart because of all of the issues that we're facing in our nation, we are gone. And the purposes of God are left unfulfilled. One of the things that we've been struggling with all year is how do we have the impact that we want to have as a church? Because it was easier before COVID. We had a monthly serving focus and we could go do something as a church. We were planning to go work with Feed My Starving Children, so we were going to go there and we were going to do this. We had this whole calendar of events all planned out for the whole year, and then COVID happened. It's like, we're not going anywhere. And most people aren't even coming here. So I'm not even going to see people. And so how do we have a serving focus in the middle of it? And yet, incredibly, it was incredible. At the end of this year, when we look back on what was done and how God gave us opportunities to serve, this is what we're going to hear. We got a letter earlier this year from the Lancaster Food Pantry saying thank you for the donation of $1,000. Because we gave $1,000 to the Lancaster Food Pantry. Then Southwest Cap wrote us a letter saying thank you for the donation of $1,000 to Southwest Cap. You know why? Because we gave $1,000 to help hungry people at the Southwest Cap, on top of the $2,000 that we've given to Feeding Friends. And then this is one of my favorite notes. There's this wonderful Opportunity House, it's called, in Dodgeville, where they help women who are struggling to recover from substance abuse. And somebody told us they didn't have a TV in the whole house. And so we bought a TV for these women who are struggling to recover from substance abuse in Dodgeville. And they wrote us this note saying, thank you so much for the TV you donated. It's beautiful. It'll put a smile, listen to this, it'll put a smile on many faces. We did that. I didn't do that. And the purposes of God are only fulfilled with the word we. So now, how important is unity to you? Do you get why he's prayed for it 3 times in one prayer? Do you get this now? And I want to ask you, as you walk out here today, are there some changes you need to make? Are there some apologies you need to make to God, saying, God, I'm sorry, I was really looking down on somebody in this camp. My attitude has not been right. It's just a simple apology. God, I'm sorry. I'm not better than, I've been doing this part of it wrong, and I'm sorry. Are there some changes to the way that you need to stop sharing your opinion Is the verse that hit you the hardest when God said in Romans, keep between yourself and God? Or maybe it's just the way, because you say things with such declarative truth as if this is the only way, rather than with humility, which is supposed to define our words and our lives, is that there's humility. We know we're wrong. We know we're wrong all the time. Now, some of you just who are here or watching online, you're just exploring your faith with us, and I'm so grateful that you're here. I love to talk about God's acceptance. Do you know what you have to do to be accepted by God? Nothing. God does not put conditions upon you for his acceptance and love and adoption into his family. Did you know that? He wants to adopt every single man and woman, boy and girl, into his family, make them sons and daughters forever. And there's no condition to it. The price that needed to be paid was already paid in full for all of us. That's what Jesus did. See, the reality is, it's so easy for us to vilify the other side, whoever the other side is in your mind. They're the problem, but the reality is, Jesus came to reveal we're the problem. I'm the problem. Do you know how many unloving things I have said in my life? Can't even count high enough. Do you know how many unloving thoughts I've had in my head in my lifetime, or unloving behaviors I've brought into this world? Yeah, the problem isn't out there. The problem is right here, and that's what Jesus came to reveal. The problem is you. When you look in the mirror, we have all been unloving in our lifetime. No human can claim perfect love, not even close. But God does. God is perfectly loving. And to be with him, we have to be like him, and we're not. And so Jesus came to take care of that. When Jesus died on the cross, the Bible said he took into his body every unloving word I have ever spoken in my life and paid in full for it all. And every unloving thing I've ever done paid for in full by Jesus on the cross. No more payment needed. And he paid for you. And any human being, anywhere, anytime that will turn to Jesus and ask for this gift will be completely forgiven, adopted into his family, and made his son or daughter forever. That's the offer of Christianity. Unconditional love and acceptance and adoption by God if you just take it. Let me have you bow your heads. Maybe this is the next step for you spiritually. Maybe you've been a part of religion in the past where it was all about earning and earning and doing and doing and doing, and now for the first time you've heard that it's really about done. It was all done for you. You don't have to. Matter of fact, you can't do anything. But he can. He can do it all for you if you will let him. And all you have to do is ask for it. Just say something like this to him in your heart. Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I know I've been unloving. I know it. There have been things I've said and done that I regret. But I heard that you paid for me on that cross. My debt's paid. Please forgive me. I want to be in your family. I want your acceptance and love and adoption today. Did you give that to me today? In Jesus' name, amen. Now maybe you just prayed, and if you're watching online, go to our website and there's a Connect With Us tab. Otherwise, if you're here, you can grab your little connection card out of your program. You don't have to fill it out fully if you're a regular tender, just put your name down. But maybe you prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you or renewed your commitment, just check one of these boxes and let us know about it. If you have something you want us to pray about, there's a prayer section right here. Or maybe you want to make a comment today on this, you're welcome to do that. Or again, online at our Connect to Us tab, you can just go there and put your comments in and hit submit, it'll get to me. And then just drop it in one of the, for those of you here, just drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back wall. Thanks so much for coming, and we hope that you're able to come back next week.